Paul Petitte, CBN News, joins me now. There is a lot riding on the election this coming November. Abortion certainly going to be a key issue given how Democrats believe that propelled them to success during the midterms. But there are some deceptive tactics to be on the lookout for when it comes to the abortion issue in November as well. So, Paul, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always good to be on.
So, can you get us up to speed on these efforts from abortion activists since Roe v. Wade was overturned back in June of 2022?
Yeah, Dan, as you say, a lot's been happening. So let's go back. So Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision that overturned abortion across the country and threw it to the states. And that's something important to understand. A lot of people, when it first came out, think, well, it made it illegal across the country. It gave the decision to the states. And as a result of that, there's been a lot of activity across the country when it comes to abortion. Now, for instance, in 13 states, that includes Arkansas, where I live, there were trigger laws in place. That meant if Roe v. Wade was in fact overturned as it was, an immediate law was already in place that would ban abortions, and every state has a different way that they ban them up to a certain gestational period or under certain conditions. But the bottom line, 13 of these trigger law states across the country, mostly in the middle of the country, as you can imagine, put these trigger laws in place immediately, which banned abortion in that states under certain conditions. So what's been happening since then? Well, immediately afterwards, 6 different states, and I'll read them off to you. This includes California, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Vermont, and Ohio. They immediately voted on state constitutions that basically enshrined abortion in their state constitution, making it legal to have an abortion in that state. So there's a lot of activity, a lot of fighting going on. And now the focus is on these state constitutions in states that include Arkansas, as I mentioned, Arizona, Colorado, Florida. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Iowa, Maine, Maryland, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and South Dakota. So your listeners, if they live in one of those states, need to listen up because there's a lot of activity happening and they could be deciding this in November during the presidential election.
So, how are they sort of trying to lift some of these bans that you're talking about in certain states that have been put in place, these abortion restrictions? What type of efforts are underway to overturn that?
Well, basically, they're circumventing the legislatures, the legislation, as well as the governor. They're basically going straight to the people and having them vote on these. And that's where a constitutional amendment comes into play. So the people are voting, all right, not the elected legislators deciding that people elect to make those decisions on their behalf. So they're going directly to the people. And they're using this as a strategy, if you would, because they know if they could position it right. And you know, and I know, if you've ever gone to the ballot, and I'm not just talking abortion, any ballot question, it could get very confusing. You've got to decide right then or there, are you voting yes or no? And so this is sort of their plan to circumvent the governor, circumvent each state assembly or legislature, go directly to the voters. In the case of Arkansas, they have to get 60,000 signatures, first of all, to get on the November ballot. And if successful, then it will be up to a public vote. But the wording of this, and we'll talk about this here in a second, is very interesting because it took 3 different efforts by the abortion advocates to get the writing correct. It has to go through a certain procedure, at least here in Arkansas, where the Attorney General, in our case, Tim Griffin, first time around said, no, this is too vague. Second time around, you don't even use the word abortion here. And which is another whole discussion, right?
Yeah.
So it took him 3 tries just to get the wording right, and then the people will decide. So it's really a life or death vote come November in Arkansas and those other states that I mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. The way they word these things sometimes is just if you didn't prep it going into it, and this is why you got to have segments like this, and why you have to do your own research before you go into the voting booth, because you walk in there and you see some of these ballot initiatives, you're like, I don't even know what this means really. And, a lot of times people probably just check it, which is why they get real crafty with the wording. And we'll get into that more in a minute, but explain the difference between, if you could, Paul, abortion legislation and abortion amendment.
Yeah, in legislation, it goes in the same path as any law, any act would turn into a law. You know, those things you learned in grammar school, right? That, you know, the bill is put forth and then the legislators vote on the bill. And if they get enough votes in both houses, as the Senate as well as the House, then it goes to the governor. The governor could veto it in the state level, just like you could on a national level. And it could be overridden, or if the governor signs the bill, it becomes law. That's the way it's always worked since our Constitution was written, and that's how we've always done it. Now, when you're talking a constitutional amendment, that means they go through a certain procedure, whoever wants this put before the people, and then it will go directly to the voters, circumventing, as I mentioned earlier, the legislature, circumventing the governor. And if the people vote yes or no, up or down, simple as that, majority vote. And in certain states, they have to get a certain amount of the majority. So for instance, in Florida, and this can be different from other states, which this was just decided April 1st in Florida, that is going to go before the people for a vote for a constitutional amendment. They have to get 60% of the vote. It's not a simple majority here. So every state's a little bit different, but the bottom line is the people will vote directly. Once that happens, it becomes very, very difficult. And here's the darkness behind the strategy. It becomes very, very difficult for the legislature to then come in and overturn that. It's got to go back to the people. And with a majority of the people, and some research studies showing upwards to 60% being for abortion, of course, they don't go into the detail of what they mean by pro-abortion or anti-abortion, right? They just say that this amount, but how the question is written and how it's presented makes a huge difference in this. But if they keep it before the people, and here again is the strategy, they feel very strongly based on that research that they're going to be able to go through each and every one of those states and get abortion back in, get those bans lifted, and have abortion on demand in those 13 states that I mentioned.
You know, in your report, you talked about some of the deception, Paul, is being used by these abortion advocates that could potentially open the floodgates to abortion on demand. So talk a little bit about these tactics and also what pro-lifers can do to sort of combat these abortion initiatives from getting on their ballots in their states.
Yeah, again, we talked about the wording, right? You got to be very clear on that. And again, it took 3 tries just in the state of Arkansas to get this on the ballot, just the wording now, okay? And again, they still have to get 90,000 signatures. So if you read in detail, you begin to learn that, and what it doesn't always explain to you is what is the health and the life of the mother. And again, here is the darkness behind the strategy, in that I think a lot of people, okay, would say, regardless of where they stand, would say, okay, if you're talking about the life of the mother, if you're talking about her life being in jeopardy, then I might be for abortion. I might be able to be swayed by that. So understanding that, that word itself sort of gets expanded in a great detail. How so? I spoke to some pro-life groups here in the state of Arkansas, and they were telling me, Arkansas Right to Life, that what it comes down to is now, okay, first, who could decide? Well, abortion doctors could decide what is defined as the life or the health of the mother. And here in Arkansas, it's banned completely unless an emergency. Okay, how do we define emergency? Well, it's coming down to the point where if it is approved and the voters decide yes, it would allow an abortion doctor, if abortion ban gets lifted here in Arkansas and the voters approve it in November, it would allow an abortion doctor to sit before a patient, and the mother may say, well, you know, if I have this baby, I'm already feeling suicidal, I might kill myself. Boom, the life of the mother is at stake. And an abortion would be allowed and basically prompted by the abortion physician. Or this is really affecting my mental health. They're another avenue. So we're sort of assuming what life of the mother sounds like, what the health of the mother sounds like, but in reality, we're basically opening the floodgates, because you simply go in and say, I'm feeling my mental health, I'm in distress, emotional, I'm a mess, I can't do this. And the abortionist would sign off on it, and abortion would be allowed.
Yeah, and that is the key, because you're putting the onus on abortion determinant doctors, these doctors that have made a living doing this and who want to do this and many times believe in this. And of course, when you think about what it actually is that they're doing, and then you say, well, wait a minute, are they going to Are they going to be honest on this part of it? I mean, it's you know, it's you're really playing with fire there when it comes to that issue. And so, and again, playing with fire, Paul, here, this clearly is going to be a big issue come November. And we've already seen President Biden lean into this. Democrats feel that they've, got made a lot of headway there with it on the midterms. How do you think this abortion issue is going to play into the November election when it comes to the congressional candidates as well?
Yeah, congressional or both state as well as at the federal level. It's concerning, Dan. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we're talking life and death here, period. There's no other two ways you could talk about this issue. And the fact of the matter is, as you mentioned, if you recall, that we were expecting a red wave, right, during the midterm elections. It didn't happen. And a lot of pundits out there, a lot of strategists out there in politics said that the key they found was that people were voting, they were using abortion as the key issue, that if you vote for that candidate, you're not going to have abortion available in your state. And so obviously the Democrats perked up to that, and they are focusing on that. As a matter of fact, in Florida, which again just happened on April 1st, they now see, the Democrats, that this state is now possibly up for grabs, which, as you know, has continually been a Republican state when it comes to the presidential election. They feel now it's in play as a result of the abortion issue in that state going in a constitutional amendment. So they're putting that in each and every one. They're putting the issue of abortion behind each and one of their candidates for that very purpose. And so it's a scary time. And if you watch the State of the Union address, you heard President Biden from the Hall of Congress himself speaking about the issue. And I found it interesting that in that 5 minutes, and anybody can look it up simply by Googling it, you can watch that little 5-minute segment for yourself. He spoke directly about reproductive rights. But in that 5 minutes, Dan, I never once heard the word abortion. The way they're circumventing and using these euphemisms to sort of distance the real issue here is frightening and concerning and frankly sickening. He talked about reproductive rights, which is now the new word. It used to be pro-choice. Now it's reproductive rights, even though they're not really reproducing anything. They're trying to stop that reproduction by killing it, right? But they call it reproductive rights. And he went on and talked about the women's right, and reproductive rights won't be stopped, and we're going to prevail, to applause and standing ovations. And then pointing to the crowd to a woman in Texas that had a fetus, and don't want to use the word baby, right? We use the word fetus here. Again, these euphemisms to try to water down the real issue at stake. Abortion, baby turns into fetus, and reproductive rights. And pointed to the woman that was in Texas, and because Texas has abortion bans, literally had to go across state lines to have an abortion put in place, to have her abortion, and was given a standing ovation like she was a hero. This is where we're at, and this is how the Democrats have sat up and say, you know what, this is possibly winnable. We're going to go after this issue. So it is front and center come November.
All right. Well, Paul Petitte, I appreciate you looking into this and keeping an eye on it. And certainly there's going to be more updates between now and November. So we'll look for more on this issue, and we'll be keeping an eye on it. Obviously a critical issue to believers everywhere and to everyone across the country, really, wherever they fall. But for believers, obviously this is a very heartfelt issue, looking at scripture and looking at what God says about life and being made in the Imago Dei. So appreciate you taking a look at this, Paul, and joining us today.
Yeah, as always, Dan. And again, anybody who wants to learn more in those states that I mentioned, get involved, find out what's going on. Make sure your church knows, and those that are around you know what's on the ballot and how what it really says and how they should vote, of course. So, Dan, appreciate it. Always great to be here.
All right, Paul, thanks a lot.